Hello and welcome to Mountain Patriot Homestead. Today I am going to cover two subjects in one in today's video, and we are going to talk about the freezer soup that I have mentioned in previous videos, as well as how to can that soup. So come right back and let's get started. Now, the ingredients that I'm going to be putting in today's freezer soup concoction is going to be a combination of several different things. One thing is going to be my container that I keep leftovers in. Now, I've talked about this. I keep it labeled soup. I know what's in it because I don't have any other containers in my freezer like this, but in this goes, and I have used this sort of thing since my kids were very little. Well over 30 years I've been using this type of system to keep leftovers in. And what happens is when I have leftovers that either I've made so much of because I have a habit of cooking way too much sometimes, and after a while I'll either can it as that particular leftover or freeze it as that particular leftover, or I will put it in our soup pot, our soup container that goes in the freezer, and I'll just keep adding to that. Sometimes it may be a spoon of green beans or whatever that I don't want to throw out, so I will just pop it into my soup container and put it in the freezer, and later on I will take it out when it gets full or I get enough other stuff to add to it, and I will make soup. And sometimes that will be, we'll use it as a meal and then can the remainder, or sometimes if we're having other things that we have out for our meals, I will just can this up as soup. And so when I talk about fast food, I don't mean running out to a fast food restaurant somewhere or fast food joint, as we used to call them. I mean, I'll go back on the shelf and I will pull off something. Last night I canned chili. I made a big pot of chili. I canned the leftover chili. So when I talk about fast food, that's fast food for us. I can just go pull it off the shelf, heat it up, and we've got a meal. So today is going to be my freezer soup that we're going to be canning up. And here's kind of, when I open it up, here's what I see. Right on top is like a beef stew mix that we had recently, but underneath are other types of vegetables, and could be rice in there. Sometimes it can be a mixture of pork, chicken, beef. That may not sound very appetizing, but when you get all of those things together, it's surprising how good it turns out. So let's get started. And as you can see, I haven't even thawed this. I mean, it's still hard as a rock, but I'm going to put it in my big kettle and get it started, along with some other things that I pulled out of the freezer that I just want to get taken care of. All right, so into this pot I have my block of freezer soup that you saw me with a while ago, and as I put it in here, I realized that on the bottom looks like some rice and gravy. Now when I say gravy, it's like brown gravy, and then there was another layer of vegetables, and then there's the stew and noodles and mushrooms on top. I've added a mixture of, looks like cooked tomatoes. Sometimes this stuff's mystery stuff because if it's been in there so long, the container I got it out of was labeled noodles, but it's apparent this is not noodles, it's actually cooked tomatoes. And so to that, I had some containers of frozen squash that I had You know, it was some squash I'd gathered out of the garden. It was just a few at a time, and I didn't have time to cook them, and so I just tossed them in the freezer. That was yellow squash. This is zucchini. Again, we don't waste things. And you can see, yes, there's some ice crystals on here, but it is not freezer burnt yet. But, you know, if it stays in there too long, it'll kind of get that yucky freezer burnt texture and taste to it. And we don't want that because we don't want to waste. So I'm tossing that into the pot. This came out of the refrigerator. And this is some hamburger meat and gravy that we had just the other night. Again, a brown gravy, not a cream gravy. And I'm just going to toss that in there. It's going to just add another layer of flavor. Let me grab a spoon. And I'm just going to spread that around in here. And you can add whatever you want to into your pot, into your soup. The point is using what you have, not tossing out, oh, well, I only have just a little bit, it's not enough for another meal, or, hey, that might taste funny if I add it with this or do it with that. It's better to use it for something than to throw it out and, you know, it just go to waste. We don't need to feed our landfills. We need to feed ourselves. We need to learn how to talk, and that would be helpful too. But regardless, as you can see, this is a big Dutch oven, and it is now full of food. And this is food that, if I had so chosen, would have just been tossed out. And so this is going to make a number of meals, because we are going to we're going to cook it. Now, it's already all been cooked, so pretty much all I'm doing is I'm going to heat it up. These little bits of vegetables will cook in there as this is heating, and it is going to turn into a wonderful soup. As I need more moisture in it, I can either add a broth in it. I can use some type of seasonings if I want to. Now, all of this stuff has been previously seasoned, other than these little bits of squash that are in there. But pretty much what you should do, or what I do, is I taste as I go. So that way, once this starts heating up, I will taste it to see what do I need to add. If I need to add some more salt, if I want to add any herbs, I can put that in at this time. And garlic, anything that I like. I can also judge the moisture. If it needs more liquid, I can put broth, I can put water, I can put tomato juice that I have canned, and I can just adjust this to what we like to eat. So we're gonna get this cooking, and I'll come right back as soon as this gets warmed up. And we're back, and the soup is heated up, and I've got all my supplies ready to start the canning process. But before we do anything else, like I told you, the first thing I'm going to do is I want to make sure that what I am canning is flavored the way I want it flavored. It tastes okay, because honestly, I don't want to waste my time. So I'm going to taste it, and if it needs anything else, I will add to it, or I could add to it when I open it back up and heat it up to eat later. But let me just go ahead and taste of it and make sure it's okay. Perfect. All the flavors from the previous meals that this has been cooked from mingle together wonderfully. And I'll tell you now that you can make this soup 100 times, and 100 times it's going to be different. Just because the ingredients that you put in there are varied, but somehow they all seem to come together perfectly. But before we start jarring this up, I want to just go through the supplies that I have here for those first-time canners, or maybe those that are considering it, but maybe they're just a little afraid to. I want to have a little visit with you just real quick. All right, here we go. We have the soup here. It is hot. My jars are warm. I've got hot water already in this pot because here's kind of a rule. If your food's hot, you want your equipment to be hot, you know, so you don't have any jars busting. That's a big one. You know, if you're using cool foods, you use cool equipment, and you start it with cool water. Now, these electric canners do not like cool water. They want everything hot as you go. So that's why we're doing warm, warm, warm. So we're good. Shouldn't be any broken jars, and we're on our way. So got the jars here. They are sterilized. Then I have, of course, I've got a ladle here that I'll use to put the food in there. These things here, I'll show you in a minute what I'll use these for. This is a debubbler. You can use a butter knife to do the same thing, but this is plastic, so I don't have to worry about nicking any jars. But when I get the food in there, I'll use this to just go around in here to make sure there's no air bubbles. Air is not your friend when you're canning, so this will remove any air bubbles. Of course, this will just go on my jar to help me make sure that I get my food in my jars. This will help me move my jars once they're hot, and I'm moving them back and forth into canners. I've got my rings for the jars. I just made a mess. I've got my lids for my jars. Now, used to they wanted you to put lids in, you know, very hot or boiling water to soften the gaskets and things on there, but anymore they don't even recommend that you have to do that. But I still like to do that. Not hot boiling water, but just warm water, because these gaskets need to soften up a little bit, just so as the canning process, you know, you're heating up the contents of this jar and it's pushing air out. Well, it's going to push it out from under this lid. It pushes the air out, and then the jar you want to seal down on there. Well, this gasket has to be soft so it can adhere and seal down to the top of that jar. And that's kind of how the canning process goes. And this, instead of digging around in there with my fingers, I could have just used that, but my hands are clean, folks. Number one rule, cooking food, make sure you got clean hands. So, the final thing is just, you can use a cloth towel, you can use a paper towel, and I use white vinegar because I am going to clean the rims of the top of these jars before I put the lids on them. Because if you've got any food particles or anything on the top of that, the rim of that jar, it will not seal properly. So we don't want that happening. So now I'm just going to get in here, and you can see, boy, there are just, well, you could see if my arm wasn't in the way. There is just all types of goodness in this, and I can't tell you how good this house smells with this soup going today. Between the soup going and the sourdough going, it just smells amazing in the house. And you just, this is how hard it is to do canning. People think there's like some magic process to canning, and some people who do a lot of canning would like you to believe that it's like some big hard thing to do. It's really not. It is not. It's time consuming to can. Sometimes it is not hard to can. So see, I have got it in there, and I'm going to leave an inch head space. That's what it's called. This area right here is called head space. And that's down at that bottom lip of this jar. I'm getting in there with this debubbler. That's called the debubbler. Getting in there with that debubbler. Okay, getting that. Trying to not make a mess. And then I'm just going to come right here, get a little bit of my vinegar, Now, the only thing I don't use vinegar to clean the rims for is when I'm canning milk, because if you get any milk, any vinegar down in that in your milk, you have this wonderful clabber going on, which you can still use for baking, but if you want to use for drinking or anything like that, it's probably not a great thing. So I put that lid, I've debubbled it, put the lid on it. Now I'm going to put this ring on it. Now, used to, they would tell you just crank that booger down, but you don't want to crank that booger down because these lids are not as good as they used to be. They just don't make them that good anymore, and they will buckle and they will not seal properly. So I'm going to show you again. You just finger tight, and I don't have very strong hands anymore, so I don't have to worry about it being real tight, because, you know, I'm not going to crank it down anyway. Now, I already have 2 quarts of water, warm water, in my Nesco over here. So I'm just putting the jars in there. There is a rack at the bottom that keeps the jars up from the floor of this little tub that's in there. It's almost like a slow cooker. And I'm sorry, I've got that aimed down too far. There is this. It comes out, it's like I said, it's like a slow cooker. You could cook in here if you wanted to. But in the bottom of this is a ring, just that holds it up off, holds the jars up off the bottom, because that keeps it from breaking that way as well. So, all right, I am going to return back to just filling up these jars. And you know, if you're doing this and your soup starts getting too thick on you, you can come in here and just add more water, add broth, add whatever you want to it. If you want different seasonings, if you want additional onions. Now, I'll tell you what I added to this after I started it earlier and we had talked. I looked in the refrigerator and I seen that I had a little bit of peas left, and I had, you see that corn in there? Had a little bit of corn. And so I tossed that in here as well, because, you know, all that does is add some more goodness to it. So I am just debubbling and moving it to the next one. Cleaning the rim, just making sure there's nothing on that rim there. And this also, I forgot to tell you, one of the other things that you do for safety purposes before you ever start using a jar is just run your finger around it before you before you start using your jar. Run your finger around it and make sure there's no nicks, cracks. Check your glass, hold it up to a light. Make sure that everything is working or is in good shape. Again, safety. Plus, you don't want to waste all this time and money and food and equipment and then ruin it because you just didn't take a second to check on it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish these last 2 and get them in the canner, and then we will get the canner started. So stand by for that. All right, I have got all four of the jars in the canner. So I've looked, I've checked to make sure everything is good to go. So I am going to close this lid and lock it in place. That is locked now. I am going to set, this is the regulator for the venting, and I am setting that right now to exhaust, because as this heats up, it is going to push air out of here, and that is going to let the air be able to come out, and that will come out. You will see steam come out, and you'll just see the process as we go. So I'm going to set that on high because I want to pressure cook, and because of what we're actually canning, because it's got meat in it and low acidity vegetables, I'm going to set this up to 90 minutes and I am going to push start. And there we go. It is going to sit there and it's going to spin, and eventually it will begin a countdown. When this gets up to pressure in here, it will begin a countdown. It will exhaust air and steam for 10 minutes, and it will beep and let me know when it starts the exhaust. It will let me know when the 10 minutes is up, and when those 10 minutes are up, I will turn this to the airtight position, and that's when the pressure canning will actually begin, and it will count down from 90 to 0. And when that takes place, I don't mess with this. I'll leave that, let it set, because it has to come down, the pressure has to come back down to 0. It'll do it by itself. This will quit hissing and steaming and making sounds, and the vent in there, everything will open back up, and it will not let me open this until all of that happens anyway. So that is another safety feature to keep someone from coming in, opening this up, and having their stuff blow out into their face, because you would not want steam burns or blasting hot vegetables or anything like that coming out at you. So they have built these features in place. So once you've got that set and once you've got it going, you don't attempt to open the cover, and you don't let pets, kids, don't you be over here jostling it around, bumping into it. Leave it alone. And it's as safe as anything else that you can do in your home, as long as you use those safety precautions. Just leave it alone and let it do its job. All right, we'll come back as soon as it is finished and I'm able to open it up and show you the final product. All right, it's the following morning, and here is what I ended up with. I ended up running 2 batches because I had enough in that big Dutch oven to do 8 jars worth. And so I have 8 quart jars of that freezer soup that I showed you yesterday. If it looks like these lids are kind of dented in, that's what you want. That shows that they have sealed up. And here's another way to show that they've sealed up. I can pick it up by that lid and it does not come off, because if it was not sealed, it would just fall off as soon as you hit it. But another thing you'll notice is, and I've not wiped these jars down yet, but another thing that you'll notice is I have taken the actual rims off, because you don't store those with those on there. It will give you an indication of a false seal sometimes. It will look like they're sealed and they're actually not. So I take those off and I can use them on other jars. But there you go. That was as simple as that. Like I said, I ended up running 2 batches through that. I could have done the same thing with my larger canner, but I wanted to show you how simple it was with the electric canner. And if you've got any questions about that, just give me a comment down below. Let me know what you think about this video, and let me know if you're going to try some canning. I will be talking to you later. I've got to get busy. I'm going to can up some hamburger meat today, so got some other things in store. I hope you have a wonderful day. Love y'all. Mountain Patriot Homestead signing out.